Racist flight attendant spills wine on black woman. Not knowing she's the airline owner, a first-class passenger is humiliated during a flight, but the attendant's smugness will soon give way to regret as her true identity comes to light. And if you cherish your family and love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and avoid 10 years of bad luck. Flight 1342 to San Francisco began boarding at JFK International Airport's Terminal 8 at precisely 7:30 a.m. Flight attendant Jenna Mitchell stood at the entrance of the first-class cabin, her bleached blonde hair pulled into a tight bun that matched her rigid posture. She'd worked this route for 5 years, and her familiarity with the typical clientele showed in her carefully cultivated expressions. "Welcome aboard," Jenna said to an elderly businessman, her smile widening as she recognized his platinum frequent flyer card. She directed him to his seat with an exaggerated flourish, making sure other passengers noticed her preferential treatment. When a young couple fumbled with their carry-on bags, blocking the aisle, Jenna's smile tightened. "Sir, ma'am, you'll need to move along. Some of us have actual work to do." Her voice carried just enough volume to ensure nearby passengers could hear the contempt in her tone. The couple hurried forward, faces reddening. Jenna's performance continued as she moved through the cabin, creating clear distinctions in how she treated different passengers. To the CEO types in their tailored suits, she offered warm greetings and immediate assistance. To others she deemed less worthy of her attention, she barely acknowledged their presence. At 7:45 a.m., Tasha Williams approached the cabin entrance. Her charcoal gray Armani suit and Louboutin heels spoke of success, but Jenna's quick glance dismissed these details. Tasha carried herself with quiet confidence, nodding politely to crew members as she made her way to seat 2A. Several passengers looked up from their phones and tablets, noting Tasha's presence. A man in 3C smiled appreciatively at her professional demeanor. A woman across the aisle straightened in her seat, recognizing something familiar about Tasha, but unable to place it. Tasha settled into her seat, removing a book from her leather briefcase. The cover read Inclusive Leadership, Transforming Corporate Culture. She began reading, occasionally making notes in the margins with a Mont Blanc pen. At 8:15 a.m., after takeoff, Jenna began the drink service. She moved efficiently through the cabin, memorizing orders and delivering them with practiced precision to those she favored. For others, she affected a slight delay, a small power play that satisfied her sense of control. Approaching Tasha's seat, Jenna carried a tray of red wine glasses. The inevitable happened in what appeared to be an accident, but the slight twist of Jenna's wrist suggested otherwise. Red wine splashed across Tasha's white silk blouse, creating an expanding crimson stain. Instead of immediate apology, Jenna's response came with a raised eyebrow and a smirk. "Oh dear," she said, voice dripping with false concern. "Perhaps next time you'll consider wearing something more appropriate for travel." Her emphasis on appropriate carried clear undertones of prejudice. The cabin fell silent. Other passengers stopped their conversations, attention drawn to the scene unfolding before them. Tasha looked down at her ruined blouse, then up at Jenna, her expression carefully controlled despite the obvious provocation. The tension in the cabin thickened as passengers waited to see how the situation would develop. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others watched with poorly concealed interest, sensing the brewing conflict. The tension from the wine incident rippled through the first-class cabin like an electrical current. In seat 4C, investment banker Marcus Chin muttered "unbelievable" just loud enough for those around him to hear. A woman in 5AC licked her tongue in disapproval, while a couple in row 3 exchanged knowing glances. "Did you see that? That was totally deliberate," whispered a passenger to their seatmate, their voice carrying despite their attempt at discretion. The murmurs grew, creating a low buzz of disapproval throughout the cabin. Jake Torres, a social media influencer with 2.3 million followers, sat in 6D. He'd been documenting his first-class experience for his travel vlog, but now his iPhone captured something far more compelling. His practiced hands steadied the camera as he framed the scene, making sure to capture both Jenna's dismissive posture and Tasha's composed reaction. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching this live," Jake whispered into his phone. This flight attendant just accidentally spilled wine on a passenger and followed it up with what might be the most condescending comment I've heard in years. His followers began flooding the live stream with angry face emojis and comments demanding justice. A group of executives in the back of first class stopped their business discussion, turning their attention to the unfolding drama. One of them, recognizing the gravity of the situation, began recording on his own phone as backup documentation. Tasha looked directly at Jenna, her voice steady and measured. "I understand accidents happen," she said, dabbing at her blouse with a napkin. "However, your comment was unnecessary and unprofessional." Her words carried no anger, only a calm assertion of dignity that made Jenna's behavior seem even more egregious by comparison. The contrast between Tasha's composure and Jenna's obvious disdain created a palpable atmosphere of discomfort in the cabin. Several passengers who had previously experienced Jenna's subtle discrimination began sharing glances of recognition, seeing their own experiences reflected in this moment. Jake's livestream comments exploded. "This is exactly what happened to my sister last month. At American Air needs to see this. Someone's getting fired. Mad respect for how that lady is handling it." Clapping hands. The view count climbed rapidly as Jake's followers shared the stream across multiple platforms. Within minutes, what had started as a first-class cabin incident was becoming a viral moment in real time. Passengers who had initially looked away now found themselves drawn into the drama. Some began openly criticizing Jenna's behavior, while others watched in uncomfortable silence, perhaps recognizing their own past complacency in similar situations. An elderly gentleman in the first row cleared his throat loudly. "Young lady," he addressed Jenna, "I believe you owe this passenger a proper apology." His intervention sparked a chorus of agreeing murmurs from other passengers, transforming individual disapproval into collective action. The social dynamics of the cabin shifted rapidly. What had started as an isolated incident between a flight attendant and a passenger was evolving into a public referendum on behavior, prejudice, and accountability. Jake's camera continued recording, documenting every nuance of the unfolding situation. Jenna's face flushed as she felt the cabin's collective disapproval. "I apologize if my actions were misinterpreted," she said stiffly, emphasizing misinterpreted in a way that suggested anything but genuine remorse. "Let me get you some club soda for that, Stain." Her attempt at damage control rang hollow, especially given her previous behavior. The live stream on Jake's phone hit 50,000 viewers. Comments flooded in faster than anyone could read them, and hashtag #FirstClassRacism began trending locally on Twitter. Jake provided running commentary in hushed tones, the flight attendants now trying to backtrack, but watch her body language. Notice how she's still not making direct eye contact with the passenger. Several rows back, a corporate diversity trainer recognized the textbook non-apology and shook her head. "That's not an apology," she said loudly, "Ugh for others to hear. That's deflection of responsibility." Tasha sat quietly, her hand resting on her phone. As the newly appointed CEO of the airline, she had the power to end Jenna's career with a single call. But her personal philosophy on leadership, shaped by years of experiencing and overcoming discrimination, made her hesitate. She watched Jenna's defensive posturing, seeing beyond the immediate confrontation to the deeper systemic issues it represented. The flight's chief purser, alerted by the commotion, approached the scene. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, looking uncertainly between Jenna and Tasha. Before either could respond, Jake's livestream captured the purser's arrival, and viewers began speculating about potential disciplinary action. Jenna seized the opportunity to reshape the narrative. "There was a slight accident during beverage service," she explained to her superior, her voice taking on a professional tone that contrasted sharply with her earlier behavior. "I've offered to help clean the passenger's blouse, but she seems unreceptive to assistance." The pause before unreceptive carried unmistakable implications. The other flight attendants exchanged worried glances. They'd witnessed Jenna's behavior before, but had always avoided confrontation. Now, with hundreds of thousands watching online and the cabin's atmosphere growing more tense by the minute, they couldn't maintain their usual silence. Tasha observed all of this, her training in corporate crisis management kicking in. She recognized the moment as a potential catalyst for change, but also understood the complexity of public confrontations. One wrong move could transform a teaching moment into a social media circus. The video continued spreading across platforms. Aviation blogs picked up the story, and journalists began making calls to the airline's PR department. In the corporate headquarters, phones started ringing as news of the incident reached executive offices. Meanwhile, in the cabin, passengers began sharing their own experiences with Jenna. She did something similar last month, one frequent flyer mentioned, but nobody recorded it then. Others nodded in recognition, creating a ripple effect of revealed grievances. Jenna felt her carefully constructed world of privilege and power starting to crumble. Her attempts to maintain composure became increasingly strained as she realized the situation had escalated beyond her control. The cameras, the witnesses, the trending hashtag, everything she had relied on to maintain her position of authority was now working against her. The color drained from Jenna's face as she scrolled through her phone during a brief break in the galley. The video had reached 500,000 views, and her name was being shared in aviation forums. Messages from co-workers started flooding in. "Have you seen this? Is this you? OMG, what happened?" Reality hit her like a physical force. In her 12 years of flying, she'd never faced consequences for her subtle discriminations. Now, in just 40 minutes, her carefully constructed professional facade was crumbling under the harsh spotlight of social media scrutiny. Meanwhile, Jake approached Tasha's seat, camera temporarily lowered. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said quietly, "but I think what happened here represents something bigger than just one incident." His typical influencer persona had faded, replaced by genuine concern. Tasha gestured for him to sit in the empty seat beside her. "Sometimes," she replied, measuring her words carefully, "change requires uncomfortable moments to be made visible." She shared her perspective on transformative justice versus pure punishment, speaking from years of experience in corporate leadership. "The goal isn't to destroy someone's life," Tasha continued, her voice low enough that Jenna couldn't hear from her position in the galley. "It's to create understanding and genuine change. But that requires genuine acknowledgement and remorse first." Jake nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. His followers were demanding Jenna's immediate termination, but Tasha's measured approach made him consider a different angle. He turned his camera back on, this time focusing on sharing a more nuanced discussion about accountability and growth. Jenna, watching from afar, misread the conversation as plotting against her. Her panic mounted as she imagined herself blacklisted from every airline, her career in aviation ending in disgrace. She grabbed a clean cloth and approached Tasha's seat again, her movements jerky with desperation. "Please, let me help clean your blouse," Jenna said, her voice cracking slightly. "I have some special cleaning solution that might work." The offer came not from genuine remorse, but from self-preservation, a distinction not lost on the observant passengers. Tasha looked at the cloth in Jenna's trembling hand, then at her face. The fear in Jenna's eyes was real, but it was fear of consequences, not recognition of wrongdoing. "Thank you," Tasha replied firmly, "but I prefer to handle it myself." The dismissal was polite but unmistakable. Several passengers exchanged knowing looks. They recognized the difference between genuine accountability and panic-driven damage control. One businessman who'd witnessed the entire scene shook his head and muttered, "Too little, too late." The video continued to spread, now picked up by major news outlets. The airline social media team scrambled to respond to thousands of angry comments, while their PR department prepared for what was quickly becoming a major crisis. Jake's live stream captured everything. Jenna's desperate attempt at reconciliation, Tasha's dignified refusal, and the cabin's collective recognition of the moment's significance. His followers began sharing personal stories of similar experiences, transforming the incident into a catalyst for broader discussion about systemic discrimination in the service industry. The flight reached its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet when Tasha decided it was time. She stood up, smoothed her wine-stained blouse, and addressed the cabin with quiet authority. "I believe I should introduce myself properly," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the first-class section. "I'm Tasha Williams, and as of last week, I'm the new chief executive officer of this airline." The revelation hit the cabin like a thunderbolt. Jake's livestream chat exploded with shocked emoji faces and all-caps comments. A passenger dropped their phone, creating a sharp clatter in the sudden silence. Another whispered, "Oh my God," loudly enough to be heard 3 rows back. Jenna, who had been arranging drinks in the galley, froze in place. The bottle of sparkling water she'd been holding slipped from her grasp, rolling across the floor. Her face, already pale, now took on an almost ghostly pallor as the full implications of her actions crashed over her. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder, more intense. Passengers who had been merely observing now sat forward in their seats, sensing they were witnessing something historic. A member of the airline's board, coincidentally in seat 7A, immediately began typing an urgent email to his colleagues. "I hadn't planned to reveal my position this way," Tasha continued, her voice steady. "My first week was supposed to be about quietly observing our operations, understanding our service from a passenger's perspective. Instead, we're all here, confronting something that apparently needs immediate attention." Jake's followers surged past the 1 million mark. News networks began picking up the story, with aviation reporters scrambling to confirm Tasha's identity. Within minutes, her corporate headshot appeared alongside the viral video on major news websites. The tension in the cabin became almost unbearable. Some passengers openly glared at Jenna, while others watched Tasha with a mixture of respect and anticipation. The other flight attendants huddled near the galley, whispering urgently among themselves, clearly uncertain about protocol in this unprecedented situation. Jenna took an unsteady step forward, then back, her usual confidence shattered. Her hands trembled as she tried to straighten her uniform, a reflexive gesture that seemed painfully inadequate given the circumstances. The power dynamic had shifted so dramatically that her previous authority felt like a distant memory. Tasha remained standing, her presence commanding the space in a way that had nothing to do with her title and everything to do with her composure. She surveyed the cabin, noting the reactions of each person, from the vengeful satisfaction of some to the uncomfortable squirming of others who perhaps recognized their own biases in Jenna's behavior. "What happens next," Tasha said, breaking the thick silence, "will be a reflection of not just our airline's values, but our collective responsibility to address these moments when they occur." The weight of her words settled over the cabin, heavy with implication. "I was just joking around," Jenna blurted out, her voice higher than usual. It was meant to be lighthearted customer service. Building rapport with passengers. Her attempt at justification fell flat in the tense cabin air, making several passengers shift uncomfortably in their seats. Tasha raised her hand, silencing Jenna mid-sentence. "Let's be very clear," she said, her voice carrying the weight of countless similar jokes she'd encountered throughout her career. "Discrimination masked as humor is still discrimination. The impact of our actions matters more than our intended humor." The cabin divided itself into clear factions. A small group of passengers, primarily older white men in business suits, muttered about oversensitivity and cancel culture. But they were quickly drowned out by the majority who voiced their support for Tasha through nods, quiet words of encouragement, and pointed looks at Jenna. "Everybody makes mistakes," called out a passenger from the back of first class, his voice carrying a defensive tone. "We can't crucify people for every little thing." 3 other passengers nodded in agreement, creating a small pocket of resistance to the prevailing mood. Tasha turned to address this comment directly. "You're right," she acknowledged, surprising those who expected a more confrontational response. "Everyone does make mistakes, but what matters is how we handle those mistakes when they're brought to our attention. Do we defend them, or do we learn from them?" Jake's livestream captured every word, his camera switching between Tasha's composed expression and Jenna's increasingly agitated state. The comment section became a battlefield of opposing viewpoints, mirroring the tension in the cabin. "I propose something," Tasha announced, addressing the entire cabin. "Let's have an honest conversation about what happened here. Not to shame or punish, but to understand and grow." She gestured to the empty seats around her. Who would like to share their perspective? The proposal created an immediate buzz. Some passengers unbuckled their seatbelts, ready to participate, while others sank deeper into their seats, clearly uncomfortable with the suggestion of open dialogue about prejudice and privilege. Jenna stood rigid by the galley, her uniform feeling suddenly too tight, too constraining. She watched as passengers began to move, reorganizing themselves for the impromptu discussion. Her years of carefully constructed superiority were about to be dissected by a plane full of witnesses, with thousands more watching online. Before we begin, Tasha added, I want to make one thing clear. This isn't a trial. This is an opportunity for understanding. But understanding requires accountability. She looked directly at Jenna as she spoke these last words, making it clear that deflection and excuses would not be accepted. The dialogue began when a black woman in row 5 raised her hand. I've flown this route monthly for 3 years, she said, her voice steady. Every time I board wearing business attire, I get the same looks, the same subtle questions about whether I'm in the right cabin. Other minority passengers nodded in recognition, their shared experiences creating an invisible bond. Jenna's isolation grew with each new testimony. She stood against the galley wall, watching as passenger after passenger shared stories that mirrored today's incident. Her usual support system of privileged passengers who might have defended her old-school service style remained conspicuously silent. Jake's live stream continued capturing every moment. His commentary had shifted from sensationalism to thoughtful documentation. What we're witnessing, he narrated quietly, is more than just an HR incident. This is a real-time lesson in accountability and systemic bias. 2 months ago, contributed an Asian executive, you served my white colleague first every time, even though I was sitting closer to the aisle. Small things, but they add up. His testimony sparked a wave of similar observations from other passengers who had noticed patterns in Jenna's behavior. The weight of collective testimony pressed down on Jenna. Her breathing became shallow, her practiced customer service smile completely abandoned. Each news story stripped away another layer of her professional facade, revealing the prejudices she'd always denied harboring. Meanwhile, Tasha observed the proceedings with careful attention. As both CEO and target of today's discrimination, she balanced corporate responsibility with personal investment. The transformation happening in the cabin, painful as it was, represented exactly the kind of change she'd hoped to implement in the company. I've worked with Jenna for 3 years, a fellow flight attendant suddenly spoke up, her voice shaking. I've seen things, but I never said anything. I'm part of the problem too. Her admission brought a new dimension to the conversation, highlighting how silence enables discrimination. Jake's followers watched the scene unfold with intense interest. Comments poured in. This is what real leadership looks like, finally seeing accountability in real time. Those of us who stayed quiet are just as responsible. Jenna's isolation reached its peak as she realized no one would step forward to defend her actions. The carefully constructed world where her behavior was acceptable had crumbled, leaving her exposed to the harsh reality of her choices. Tasha stood again, commanding attention without raising her voice. Ms. Mitchell, she addressed Jenna formally. Having heard these testimonies, do you understand why your actions today cannot be dismissed as mere jokes or accidents? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. The entire cabin, along with thousands of online viewers, waited for Jenna's response. Her career, her reputation, and her understanding of herself hung in the balance. Ms. Mitchell, Tasha's voice cut through the tension. I'm asking you to address not just today's incident, but the pattern of behavior we've all heard described. Would you please step forward and face your colleagues and passengers? The request transformed the cabin into an impromptu courtroom. Passengers adjusted in their seats, all eyes fixed on Jenna, who remained frozen by the galley. The gentle hum of the aircraft engines provided an ominous backdrop to the unfolding drama. Jenna started, her voice barely audible. She cleared her throat and tried again. I don't think this is appropriate. We're still in flight, and I have duties to attend to. Her attempt at professionalism rang hollow against the backdrop of revelations. A ripple of disapproving murmurs swept through the cabin. Jake's livestream comments exploded with criticism of her deflection. The real-time reaction seemed to physically push Jenna forward, forcing her to take small steps toward the center of the cabin. "Your primary duty," Tasha responded firmly, "is to ensure every passenger feels respected and safe. Based on what we've heard today, you've consistently failed at this fundamental responsibility." Her words carried the weight of both personal experience and corporate authority. The other flight attendants watched from a distance, their own complicity in maintaining silence weighing heavily on their consciences. One of them wiped away tears, perhaps recognizing similar behaviors in herself. "I would like you to apologize," Tasha continued. "Not with corporate jargon or conditional language, but with genuine understanding of the impact your actions have had on countless passengers over the years." Jenna's face flushed crimson. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she felt the pressure of dozens of eyes boring into her. The cameras recording every moment of her discomfort added another layer of judgment to an already overwhelming situation. Jenna's voice cracked. She swallowed hard and tried again. "I'm sorry if anyone felt." The collective groan from passengers cut her off mid-sentence. The word "if" hung in the air like an accusation. "Let me be clear," Tasha interjected. "We don't need to hear what you're sorry if people felt. We need to hear what you're sorry for doing." Her correction served as both instruction and reprimand. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Jake lowered his phone slightly, though still recording, as if the weight of the moment demanded more respect than mere documentation. Under the collective scrutiny of the cabin, Jenna's carefully constructed professional persona finally cracked. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time, real emotion broke through her practiced facade. "I'm sorry," she began again, her voice wavering. "I'm sorry for treating passengers differently based on their appearance. I'm sorry for making assumptions, for the subtle dismissals, for the preferential treatment that hurt so many people." The words came out mechanically, rehearsed, lacking the genuine remorse the situation demanded. The passengers exchanged knowing looks. They'd heard such apologies before, carefully worded statements designed to defuse situations rather than acknowledge real harm. Jake's livestream comments reflected the same skepticism. "She's just sorry she got caught, and notice how she's watching Tasha's reaction instead of actually reflecting?" Tasha stood, smoothing her wine-stained blouse, the physical evidence of the incident that had sparked this confrontation. "Ms. Mitchell," she said, her voice carrying both authority and disappointment, "an apology without understanding is just damage control. Your words suggest you're more concerned with saving your job than acknowledging the real impact of your actions." The truth of this observation hit Jenna visibly. She flinched, her defensive posture returning. "What do you want from me?" she burst out, frustration overtaking her attempt at contrition. "I said I'm sorry. What more can I possibly do?" This outburst confirmed what Tasha had suspected. There would be no genuine transformation today. She reached into her briefcase and withdrew an official airline document, the movement deliberate and final. As CEO of this airline, Tasha announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the cabin, "I have a responsibility to ensure our company culture reflects our stated values of respect, inclusion, and dignity for all. Ms. Mitchell, your actions today, combined with the pattern of behavior described by our passengers, leave me no choice." The cabin fell silent. Even the most casual observers could sense the weight of what was coming. Jake's livestream hit record viewership, his followers watching in rapt attention as justice unfolded in real time. "Effective immediately, your employment with this airline is terminated," Tasha declared. The words rang out clear and firm, met with scattered applause from passengers who had experienced or witnessed Jenna's discrimination over the years. Jenna stood motionless, the color draining from her face as the reality of her situation sank in. Years of unchecked behavior, of subtle discrimination disguised as professional prerogative, had finally caught up with her. A senior flight attendant appeared to escort Jenna to the crew rest area for the remainder of the flight. As she passed Tasha's seat, Jenna paused briefly, her lips close to Tasha's ear. "You'll regret this," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "You have no idea what you've started." The threat, though quietly delivered, didn't go unnoticed. Jake's camera caught Jenna's expression, and several nearby passengers reacted with audible gasps. The livestream comments exploded with speculation about what had been said, though only those closest to the scene had heard the actual words. Tasha remained composed, her expression unchanging as she watched Jenna being led away. She'd encountered such threats before in her career, the last desperate attempts of those unwilling to accept accountability for their actions. Yet something in Jenna's tone suggested this might not be the last time they crossed paths. The cabin settled into an uneasy calm. Passengers processed what they'd witnessed, a real-time example of consequences meeting actions, of power dynamics shifting, of long-ignored behaviors finally facing scrutiny. The incident had transformed a routine first-class cabin into a microcosm of larger societal struggles. Jake ended his live stream with a thoughtful commentary. What we've witnessed today isn't just about one flight attendant or one incident. It's about the moments we choose to speak up, the standards we set, and the changes we demand. Tasha began typing notes on her tablet, already planning the company-wide changes this incident would catalyze. New training protocols, revised hiring practices, enhanced accountability measures. The wine stain on her blouse would fade, but its impact on company policy would be permanent. Yet as the flight continued towards San Francisco, Jenna's whispered threat lingered in the air like a storm cloud on the horizon. In the crew rest area, she was already making calls, tapping into networks built over years in the industry. Her termination might have been public, but her retaliation would be carefully planned. The other flight attendants moved through the cabin with heightened awareness, their service now consciously equal and attentive. They'd learned a powerful lesson about the cost of silence and complicity. As the plane began its initial descent into San Francisco, Tasha received an email from the airline's board of directors, commending her decisive action while expressing concern about potential backlash. The incident had already sparked debates across social media about corporate accountability, systemic discrimination, and the role of public shame in driving social change. Unknown to everyone aboard, Jenna's threat wasn't empty rhetoric. In her phone lay connections to influential industry figures, evidence of other corporate misconduct she'd witnessed over the years, and the beginnings of a plan. The story that began with a spilled glass of wine was far from over. It was merely the first chapter in a larger conflict that would test both women's resolve in ways neither could anticipate. The plane touched down in San Francisco, but the ripples from Flight 1342 would continue to spread, challenging both Tasha's leadership and Jenna's capacity for revenge in an increasingly public battle for justice and redemption.